Hey, I'm going live. Hi, and welcome to Dreamy Dreamland with your Sensei Al Bob. I am your Griot Sensei Al Bob, and this program is just for entertainment's sake. And I'm, a little more than I have been. Anyway, I'm at the library, and I've been asked to tell the story of the Nordic alien. And I used to live downtown Manhattan back in the 70s. And I lived on Pearl Street in Edison's Pearl Street electric station. And the stalls who I worked for, I was their kind of go-to guy. I mean, they had two elements of their shop. They had the non-union part of the shop and the local three part of the shop. And I was like somewhere in between because I was a member of the union and I had been an apprentice on the World Trade Center. And I was very intimate with many floors of both buildings because I ran a Greenlee pneumatic pipe bender that bent galvanized pipe 2 inch and up. And it was this bench and had these knobs and then you set these little dials, you push the button, and went, and it you could bend the same bends in a piece of pipe, 20 different pieces of pipe. So I could have the perfect bend of a offset and a little this and a that. Where, you put them on a piece of Kindle. And I did that all day long, just ding, 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 knocking the stuff out. And kind of had to, I'm a little dyslexic, and that was really a good thing to have for this because you had to think about it inside out and backwards. And most people, would take the measurements and even in those days, like a 4-inch piece of galvanized cost almost $60. So if you make too many mistakes, it gets expensive and time consuming and all the rest. And so anyway, I worked for Grandpa and Mike Stoll for a number of years. And, I was like part of the family. I wasn't just an employee. I mean, I started at 9 and I used to my main job was just to make sure Grandpa Stoll didn't walk in front of a bus. And he knew everyone. He had the first master electrician's license in the United States. And he worked for both Edison and Tesla. And he wired the Niagara Falls transmission facility. And he wired the subways. And he wired everything. And he had this room that he had keys to everything. So we could go places that most people could never go. And he just liked to mosey around and look at his work and, and everyone knew him. So, we'd be in some like restricted area and he'd have the key to get in there through the back door. And we'd be in there and then people come in and go, what are you doing? Oh, Grandpa Stoll. Oh, how you doing? So this guy was like the dude and I was the kid. He was the dude. I was the kid. Anyway, so over the years, I got better and better, and I could be sent out to do things. I was like the fix-it guy. I could fix almost anything. And they had a lot of clientele who, real estate folk who owned these ancient buildings. And, they had pumps for the stand system, that's the fire system, and the elevators. And even Otis couldn't fix some of these things. Like Mike Vanelli, who kind of was the godfather of the Greenwich Village, Little Italy. Little Italy, there was a west side of Little Italy and the east side. And Mike had the center, Mott Street, and all the way down to Chinatown and all the way up to, and on Spring Street, he had a baker that made the greatest Italian, bread and these rolls. It's just amazing. Great rolls. Anyway, so he had like the restaurant business and the carting business, and he was the go-to guy. And in where NYU is, there's a thing called Washington Square, and there used to be, I don't think it's there anymore, but a kind of Frankenstein robot, because it was only the lot where the parking lot was only about 70 feet wide. and about 200 feet deep. Well, if you just parked cars on the ground, you might get 40, 50 cars in there, if that. But this thing was like a 9-story erector set thing that you drove the car in, they pushed the button and it lifted the car up and stuck it in space. So it parked like close to 400 cars. And so, and it was like Frankenstein. I mean, it was run by relays, big, and had knife switches. And so I used to fix that. And they had all these real estate guys, like Sylvan Wellington, had all these buildings downtown in the Wall Street area. All these buildings that were built in the 20s that were like, steel concrete buildings that were, somewhere between 20 and 30 stories high, right? And, again, they had all kinds of pumps and power and this and that and elevators and, Otis, and nobody wanted to take care of this stuff. So I would, was the guy who would go around with my little bag of tools and fix things. And this one company, Sylvan Wellington, they not only owned a lot of stuff, they were rehabbing the real estate to try and keep up with the needs of what that real estate was. So they owned a building on Pro Street that had been Edison's, main original power generating station. Had a steam engine in the basement and had all these generators, and they were all DC. And the building was like built like brick shit house. I mean, it was unbelievable, indestructible. But it was like very 19th century and very Edwardian. And anyway, so they and they couldn't rent it out for anything. It was just a mess. And so they rehabbed everything, and lofts were coming in. So they rented, and the first off-track betting place in New York State in Manhattan was in the ground floor of that. So Pearl Street is like right 3 blocks to Wall Street. And what is Wall Street but a gambling casino of our economy? And so those guys were like, gambling junkies. So man, they could do off-track betting. They'd go there. So the ground floor was, we redid it in the style of the off-track betting place. And then there was the second floor, third floor, fourth floor. And then the top floor was 2 floors, fifth and the sixth. And it was like a church. It was like this very roof. And what they had up there were all of these flywheels that the steam power had a big belt that went up there, and it had a takeoff. And then smaller belts went to each floor and had generators that sent power to different parts of Lower Manhattan, and from the Battery to no further than Chambers Street. And that was the original, Edison demonstration of commercial electricity for all those lawyers and businesses down there and stuff. So, that was gotten rid of as soon as Tesla made electricity commercially viable to, put big plants up place and sell them all over the place with AC. DC was not, Edison's DC couldn't be transmitted more than 6 miles before the voltage drop was intense. Anyway, so I was, Grandpa, I got a building for you. I hope they want, new service, and our union boys and you will put in, from the Edison box, the distribution, and then you and your helpers will take it from there, distribution, panels on each floor, and whatever they need on each floor. And I said, okay. So I started the job, and I went over to the guy who had the Sylvan real estate thing, was in charge of the renovation side. And, he had his own little contracting thing going. And, I'd worked with him a lot, so I know him well. So he goes, listen, I wanted to show you this building. And he knew I was a Tesla file, and I was a electrical, that I was the kid, to Grandpa Stoll's the dude. I was the dude in training. And, so I, sure, we went over to look at it. He said, so this is what I want you to do. And by the way, the top floor of this place we can't repurpose it for anything because I had all these flywheels and they had like 60 years of, it was like, oh, it was like a church. It had these big ceilings and they had these vents all the way around that were, vents, and they were louvered glass and they were colored glass, and the light that went in there was amazing. And they had all these platforms because they had these flywheels, and so they built a platform so the guys could work on it, oil it, and fix it if it needed to be fixing the bearings, etc. Anyway, so it goes, this space, you figure out what you can do with this thing. It's yours. You can stay here. I don't care. We'd like you to be here, so because we have 4 other buildings that we're redoing, and we'd like you to be the dude to take care of things there, not to be the super. We'll have a super, but because these buildings are old and finicky and got weirdness, and yes, you're going to replace a lot of it, but it's still the interface, blah, blah, blah. So I said, sure, that's great. So I tried every which way to, I got somebody up there with a, steam, that didn't work. It just made a worse mess. And I had a friend of mine who did, he resurfaced floors. And he had every kind of way of resurfacing a floor. So I brought him up there and he said, I have this machine that sprays this polyurethane. It's more like fiberglass. It's clear polyurethane fiberglass, and it sprays on pretty thick. And it sets up like concrete. So if we sprayed it on everything, and he says, I can spray it on the walls, I can spray it on the ceiling because this stuff sticks. And it'll stick to oil. I resurfaced a warehouse that had trucks, and they had years and years of truck oil on the floor, and he just resurfaced it by spraying this. So came in there in a spacesuit and did it, and it was great. And it was really actually quite beautiful because you could still see the oil and had all these patterns and colors, but it was like hard like concrete and was clear so you could see it. And everything, and had a nice shine to it, luster. And everything was covered in this polyurethane. So the walls, the ceilings, the beams, everything was covered. So you could walk on it, live in it, not get grease all over you. So I moved in and I rewired everything, and I made each different platform. I put a bathroom on one platform. I mean, there actually was a bathroom up there. The plumbing was up there, so I kind of put, and above it, I put a big jacuzzi. I mean, a big, like 10 people, a party jacuzzi, what Playboy Club had. And, a sleeping area and a writing area and a laboratory area and a kitchen area and a dining room area. And there were all these, with, really beautiful staircases going to all of them. It was like an MC Escher painting. And I lived in that. And these louvered glass things, all this colored light came through. It was just amazing. And I made all kinds of interesting theatrical lighting. And it was like an automated house, meaning I had remote control, radio controlled little buttons that I walked in, I could push and the lights would go on. Now today it's like, what do you do? But I had that in 1974, 5. Anyway, and living downtown was great because, before 7:30 there was nobody there, and after 6 there was nobody there. But there were a couple of really great bars, and there was run, super duper, what they call a men's club. And Mike Finelli sent me over there. That was one of his things. And he said, oh, I want you to this place is like, oh, it's been here forever. It's getting a little dangerous and the girls are getting electrocuted. And why don't you redo the whole thing? And so I did. And in it, they had a bar. They had a place where the girls would dance, and then they had fantasy rooms, and so I got to, and they had one fantasy room that was a peep show because there were guys who liked the peep show. The Hasids would go in there. There was a side door for the Hasids, so no one would see them go in there, and they could be in their own little box, and they would get these coins, and they would put them in there, and the shutter to the window would go up, and there was in the window, there was a little box that the guy could stuff money into, and he could put his hand in there too. And so the Hasids like do that because no one could see them, and the girl could talk to them, and they could touch them, and they could, do all of that. And somehow it stuck to the Hasidic laws of, anyway. So that thing was broken, and they had nobody who could fix it. So I took it all apart, and remade it in my own image and likeness, the control device that the coin slipped into. And that's kind of got me into my career of, wiring men's clubs. And there were some really great restaurants down there, especially if you like steak and fish, because the Fulton Fish Market was just a few blocks up. So it was quite an interesting community. And in that scene, there were many, I don't even know how to describe them. They're called DUMBs, deep underground military bases. And there were a ton of them down there, right? But they're even beyond military. They were other things. And they had been there a long time. And Grandpa Stahl, once I moved down there, he came and he found, he came up to visit, and I made him dinner once. And, he knew that building. He had been part of wiring it. He loved what I did with the upstairs. And the other part he wasn't so happy with, because it was really just, it was gambling on the first floor. There was a guy named High who sold marijuana on the second floor. And then there was another guy who sold cocaine, and another guy who did speedballs and had girls up there. And it was kind of pretty scuzzy. But, the guys who worked at, the brokers loved it, Anyway, so Grandpa Stahl, and there was this one. So there, like I said, the place closed down after 6:30, but there were certain places down there that most people didn't go to. You couldn't even get into, but they were open 24/7, 360. And like I said, there were a lot of these underground facilities, and so Grandpa Stahl took me to a couple of them, check them out. And one thing that I don't think most people, when you go into a drive-in bank, they got the little thing that you put your check in and paperwork, and it sucks it up, and it sucks it down. Well, before the internet, from the Battery all the way up to about 96th Street, there were these pneumatic tubes, billions of miles of them, and they're still there. And they would deliver from one bank to the other, so they didn't have to have couriers, and a ton of stuff. And they had pretty big ones that took heavy stuff, like the New York Fed is down there, and they would send gold. It was pretty amazing stuff. And, so he had keys to get into all of this stuff. And there was, in the movie Men in Black, that actually is down there. There's this big, where the Battery Park is, there was a big aluminum building with a big fan on it, and a very kind of exquisite double doors that go into it. If it was just a mechanical building, they wouldn't. This is pretty exotic looking, the entrance to it. And he took me in there. And it was just like the movie. There's this old black guy sitting there reading the newspaper in a uniform. And, he said, "Oh, you, well, we don't need your services anymore. And, you can't really go any further than here. Nice seeing you. You want to speak to anyone? Do you want to speak to Q or K or Z or anybody? He said, no. This is the kid. I want him to meet you. And the black guy said, well, nice to meet you, kid. And I walked out. And like I said, it was just this old black guy reading the newspaper in a kind of rumply, uniform, like, a guard at a mall. And he was sitting behind a desk. Anyway, we walked out. I said, isn't that just the vent for the Holland Tunnel? And he goes, well, part of it is, but the other part is not that. It is. And he goes, all through New York. New York's been here a long time. There's some really strange things underground, And he took me around to show me the ones, and he had keys. Like I said, he had the key to that door, and he got in. And the black guy, and I said, that black guy, he knew you. He said, oh, yeah. And I said, who is he? Is he just the guard? And he goes, no. He goes, that guy is one of the most influential, powerful, and then he used the word exotic people on Earth, or persons on Earth. I go, what? And he goes, that guy's really old. I said, as old as you? Because this guy looked like he was in the 40s. And he goes, so much older than me. And I said, Grandpa, normally you're not as, coming forward. You're always telling me what it is. And you've shown me some, he, introduced me to Madame Olga Kluver, which was a pretty amazing person, a 1,000-year-old little gnome on Lexington Avenue at a, Odyssey shop. Hey, Twitchy, always great to see you. My heart is feeling your heart, eye to eye. So I'm kind of telling alien stories of New York City. And that New York City is so stranger than strange that most people don't know how strange it is. So he never, well, he did. Years later, Grandpa Stoll kind of basically told me about aliens and all the things he had seen. And because he had been involved in some, he was involved in, he said that everything from Manhattan to Montauk Point is an underground facility. And he goes, it goes out into the ocean. And he goes, it's transnational. Then he said, trans-dimensional. So he's the guy, and he, like I said, he's the guy who taught me how to do field equations, right? And what trigonometry really was, and that geometry, was the only real math. Everything else is just kind of a sketchy thing to get people to think you can make this and that. It's kind of like, when Einstein tried to make the unified field theory, he just kept bumping into the fact that his big whoop-de-doo, equals mc square was an erroneous equation, that relativity wasn't relative, and that's one reason why, he went into the unified field theory, but he didn't figure it out. He kind of figured it out, but he didn't want to publish because then it would have shown everything he did that he was world famous for was crap. And he wanted to die before that happened. And he knew that it would take some time for some other people, smarter than him, to figure that one out. And I never met Einstein, but Grandpa Stahl worked with him on the Philadelphia experiment. And he said, Einstein was more a poet than anything. He wasn't a mathematician. All the math that made him famous, that got him his Nobel Prize, was done by his first wife. That was his cousin. That's how off the hook Einstein was. But so one of the things that Grandpa Stahl told me about him, because he hung out with him, worked for him, knew him pretty well. He said, I once asked him who the smartest person in the world was. And Einstein said, not me, Nikola Tesla. He says, not only is he the smartest person now, he's the smartest person that ever was within our recorded motif, you know. So Grandpa Stahl, he was a pretty written-in guy. Like I said, he was the dude. I was the kid. I was the dude in training. So I saw a lot of stuff, a lot of underground things, a lot of dumbs. And so the thing there down at the Battery Park, I never got into it, but I got around it. And so I lived down there. And I lived down there when New York City went bankrupt, so they didn't have money to mow the lawn. So the whole garden, my, pyramid church on top of the Pearl Street power plant, I couldn't, because it was a national heritage site, I couldn't cut holes into the edifice and stick air conditioning in there, right? I did had, louvered windows I could stick, but it was so big. The amount of air conditioning I need to cool that place down would have been pretty tough. I mean, what I did do is my little bedroom, I put walls around it and made it nice and clean and looked like a really beautiful hotel bedroom. So if I had guests, then the girls, I had a bathroom right off it, so the girls could, oh, this is nice. But if they were just sleeping on a loft up in the air, they might get a little, anyway. So I did have it, and I liked having my bedroom have no light. I liked being, I turned it into a sensory deprivation tank without the water, I actually had a water bed. Anyway, what I did do was I went down to the Battery Park, and they had all these nice little paths through it, and they had, wrought iron fences around these things, and they had gates that, because the wrought iron fences had pickets on them, so you couldn't just jump off, because you fell on it, you get stabbed. And they had gates. So I clipped off the lock that the Parks Department had on this one, and I put my own lock on it. And I went out there with a sigh and cut a nice little circle, because the grass had grown up to be about 5 feet high, because they didn't have the money to cut it. So I made a campsite and put a very nice tent and, little fire pit. And I had a really beautiful, so I could go camping. It was a nice big tree. So I had and no one could see me in there, right? But I could see everybody. And so I would camp out there. Actually, really super warm nights, because the sun hit the roof of that place, it would turn, my little pyramid into an oven. So some of those hot days, you just couldn't be in there. So I would, go into my little tent, my campsite, and I could see, right? So I had a direct, thing on that front door of that building that was supposed to be the vent for the Holland Tunnel. And I saw a lot of strange people coming in and out. I would come out looking like something, and a few steps and they'd be a human being. And and I asked, when I was living down there, this is I'm 23 when I'm living down there. And so I've been working for Grandpa Stahl since I was 9. So, I've known him for 14, 15 years, Mike Stahl was more my dad than my father. He always hugged me and told me he loved me, and that I was a great son to him, because he had all daughters. And he basically took me on because he was looking for a son. And that's how I got my master's license in New York, because you have to be born into it. Anyway, so I went there. So Grandpa, I'm camping out. I took him to my campsite, and he said, it's kind of cool because see, down on the Battery, you were getting breezes right off the Atlantic, right up the Hudson, right up the East River. It was like this total fan all the time. It was coolish too. It was like one of the cooler temperature places in Manhattan because there was all trees and grass and not a lot of concrete or asphalt and water all the way around it. So I would see all these people coming in and out of this building. And I once asked him, I said, so, a couple of years ago, we went down there and you said, you'd tell me about it. And now I'm camping. And we were sitting in these nice lounge chairs I had in my campsite. You could see, right? Nice little path so you could see that door. Nice little path outdoors so the wind could, come straight in and not have to blow through grass and, other little directions I could see. But they, I could see them, but they couldn't see me. So anyway, we're sitting there. And I said, so Grandpa, you told me about that building and you never told me anything other than that guy is older than anybody else, and, powerful and this and that. And he goes, well, Port Authority bus station, on 8th Avenue. I go, yep. He goes, well, this is like the Port Authority for the galaxy. I said, what? He goes, those people you see in that, right? They open the door, they walk out, they look a little strange, and then they kind of, within a step or two, they look totally human, right? I go, yeah. I said, many a time I've had the urge to go up to them and say, hey, how you doing? What's your name? What are you doing? He goes, don't do that. Because not all of those people are nice. And a lot of those people like to eat human beings. I said, what? Yeah. A lot of them like to eat human beings. And, they know you're here. And just because you're tricky boy and you make these nice little things so you can see them and you don't think, well, they can see, it's like they can see you like the grass isn't even here, and they kind of know who you are and they know that, you're my boy, you're the kid. So you have a little dispensation to, just to see them, a glimpse. If you were to go see them, that would go against the dispensation. So, don't go talk to them. Now, they want to come and talk to you. That's a different story. Now, they have to do a number of things, like ask you if they can come and visit you. They have to, be in a presence where they're not going to hurt you. And so, so just, I'm giving the rules of the game now. And he said, I've shown you a lot of things. Now you know that nothing is what it seems to be. You have, I've shown you that technology is thousands of years ahead of what, is sold at the mall, And this is, like I said, 1975, 1974. And anyway, so he let that go. He said, I'll tell you more stories, And he would come down because they had two shops, one uptown and one downtown. And the one downtown was not too far. And, he was mostly there. But sometimes he would get, absent-minded. And that's when I was a little kid. That was my thing to make sure he just didn't step off the curb in front of a bus, But, he actually got and hanging around with me sharper and sharper because he was my griot. He kept telling me stories and showing me things, not just telling me stories, taking me places. This guy had unbelievable access, right? So, Elon Musk wants to do this tube thing. Well, they already had that, I mean, he took me on one of those that took us out to Brookhaven National Laboratories, right? As he was teaching me the harmonics of torsion fields, he took me out because he had, carte blanche to take this one tube out there because he had a few apparatuses he had made in the 20s that still needed his, tender loving care. And one time he said, okay, I'm going to take you to someplace. And it was this place off of Chambers Street. It was just a building, and he had the key for it. And he went in, and there was a lobby, and there was a staircase that went up, and there was mailboxes, and there was nothing on the first floor. There was a door that had another lock. That had the weirdest kind of key you'd ever see put in there. And anyway, so he took me in there, and it was like a little subway station, but it was this capsule. He got in, you pushed the button, thing came down, your ears kind of popped, and like in 2 minutes, you were in Brookhaven National Laboratory in Long Island. When we got out of that thing, you went into this big hall, and there were a lot of strangeness in there. And but when you got out of that tube, there was never anybody around. You had a sense that there were people there, and that's when I first saw photonic light. It was lit up in a way that there were no light fixtures, but it was just light everywhere, and there were no shadows. He said, look at this. He put his hand out. It was nice, bright, and there was no shadow on the floor. He said, look around. There's no shadows anywhere. And he said, look around. Can you see any light fixtures? I said, no. He goes, that is photonic light. And it took a few more years for him to explain what photonic light was, but, basically said it shows no shadows. Anyway, we went to, down this hallway, went through another doorway. There was a guy, in like a military outfit, and Grandpa had, this little thing he took out of his pocket. It was like a ID of sorts. And the guy said, oh, okay, sir, sign in. And this is your +1. He says, yep, this is my assistant. He goes, okay. And he said, son, just put your hand on this little piece of glass, which I did. And then he said, just take your finger and sign your name, which I did. This big metal door opened up. We went in, and we went down, 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 down. And it was like kind of a sloping, no stairs, it's just kind of inclined plane. Came out into this big room, and there's this big transformer, and we spent afternoon there playing with it. He showed me how to tune it in a scalar kind of way. That was one of my first introductions to scalar technology. Anyway, we came back, there was a different guy at the desk, and we went out, and we went down the hallway, got in the capsule, pushed the button, ended up on Chambers Street. Anyway, so, and that was Grandpa Saul. He introduced me to loads of people who would show me other strange and interesting things. And anyway, so a number of years later, I left there, and I went to, no, it's actually before then. I had been in New Mexico, right, in 71, 72, 73. And I worked for a guy like Grandpa Stoll called Dick Powell Lecture. There's Grandpa Powell and Dick, Jr. And I basically did the same kind of work I did, but on a more industrial scale. And so I saw a lot of stuff there. I worked at Kirkland Air Force Base in San Diego, Los Alamos, and a few other places out there in the Four Corners. And when I really, really, really got introduced to nuclear technology and what it was, and what nuclear power was, which is just a scam so they could make a lot of plutonium and weapons grade uranium, very enriched. And so, I got that. So when I came back to New York and I saw all my artist friends and my anti-war friends and my racial justice friends and my feminist friends, I said, guys, all of these movements are relevant. The thing that we really have to focus on is nuclear weapons, because that can end humanity. And People talk about, global warming and all of that stuff, but really, the United States has 4,000 deliverable weapons, that are on ends of missiles ready to go. Push the button, they're off. They're in submarines, they're in silos, they're on bombers, they're in a lot of other delivery platforms. And they have another 10,000 or 20,000 that they could, load up pretty quickly, So the United States and Russia each have somewhere around 18,000 nuclear weapons. And then France, France, England, India, Pakistan, Israel, and a few other folks have maybe 2,000 nuclear weapons. Now, Pakistan has about 1,000 deliverable nuclear weapons, and India has, no, I want to say 1,000, they have about 100, and India has about 100. Now, if India and Pakistan have had 3 wars since roughly 1960, and they're always shooting at each other. They have those skirmishes on their border, and if it ever got carried away, I mean, the 3 times they got carried away, they had war. And the first 2 times, they didn't quite have the deliverable nuclear weapons. And third time, they had them, but neither of them knew how many the other had. And their deliverable systems weren't that great, so they didn't quite use them. But today, they got them on hair triggers. And if Pakistan and India ever had a nuclear, uh, little volley, they just detonated half of what they had. Like each sent 50 at each other. That 100 nuclear explosions would be enough to lift enough dirt and crap into the air to put a nuclear winter around the Earth for a good 10 to 20 years, which means it would be 30 degrees colder around the whole planet. Basically, being able to grow food would be very difficult, if not impossible. And within the first year, maybe 90% of the population would die. Plus, that dirt that's up in the air would be highly radioactive and the fallout would come down. So that's just 100 nuclear weapons. And we have something on the order of maybe all told 30 to 40,000 nuclear weapons. Now, forget about any other environmental anything. That right there. And a number of times, we should have, just, a Cuban Missile Crisis, that could have, and we've had 100 of those that they don't like to talk about. We've had 100 accidents where bombers that had, real nuclear weapons and crashed, and, the weapons were actually armed and should have blown up, but didn't. There have been missiles that have blown up in their silos and should have, there was a tight missile that had a, Mark whatever hydrogen bomb on it. And if that sucker had blown up in the silo, it would have taken out a good third of the population. Oh, who's calling? Oh, but, 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 but. Oh, I don't know who that is. Yeah, so we'll let it just go. We'll call them back. Anyway. Hey, Jane. Good afternoon, says Al Bob and Cadre. Yeah, there's 3 of you. Anyway, I should have named this thing Things That Go Bump in the Night. But what else? Anyway, so things are way weirder than anyone, even the guys that talk about paranormal and UFOs and all that. They're not even close and that's part of the issue. And so some guy wanted this little story, me meeting the Nordic aliens, right? So I come back, I'm living down the Battery, I'm still working on rock and roll places and discotheques, and I've gotten involved. I went back to work with Ralph Nader and the Pergs, and I'm talking up, hey, we got to start worrying about nuclear power and nuclear weapons. We really have to get serious about stopping this. And so, we started the no nukes movement and the anti-nuclear power movement. And, that's where I met Michio Kaku and a number of the people in the Manhattan Projects that were still alive. There was a guy who invented nuclear health physics who was really a great guy. I forget his name. Anyway, so the movement kind of moved and moved and moved. And then we started, we got the rock and roll people involved. And we did 3 big shows. We did a show in Washington, D.C. on the mall in front of the Capitol, right? And we had maybe 500,000 people there, and I was involved in that. And I was the staging guy, putting the stage up and getting crews and lighting and sound and all that stuff, because I was working on that, right? So I had access to the stuff. And there was this one guy, I forget his name. He was like an ancient version of me. And he was a wobbly, he was an anarchist, he was, but he had worked in, theater and did shows. And so he had the equipment. And if you called him up and he could fit you in his schedule, he would go there and bring his equipment and set it up for free. That's how, I forget what his name was. Anyway, so we did one in DC, and that took a lot of effort, and we had 500,000 people, it's a lot of people, got a lot of press, Then we did one to raise money at Madison Square Garden, and the Rolling Stone played, and John Lennon played, and a lot of really interesting guys played. And they always had the VIP section, what they call the green room, back where the talent hangs out before they go on or after they go on, and there's always a nice smear there, a lot of food and booze, and power, people who want to be seen with them are there. And so there was, I had a friend who I met through Ralph Nader's Perg, Gene. I called him Gene the Dancing Machine. But he was a razor blade lawyer. He was English. He went to Oxford. He went to Harvard Law School. He was, and he could have been a zillionaire, but he just worked on environmental legal matters, right? And he was head of Ralph's little crew, and or one of the major dudes. And back in the day when the Perks, I worked on NYPIRG, New York Publications Research Group, in the early days, and that's where I met him. And so he was my go-to lawyer guy. So he kind of got involved in this, and he really liked going to those concerts and rubbing elbows with these people. And he had elbows. He was also part of the UN, like when I was part of that alternative technology NGO. He was one of the people who helped that happen. Anyway, so when we did the one at Madison Square Garden, we're in the back room, and I didn't, I'm just there, and I helped the guy who, and his crew. I really wasn't like what the kind of big deal I had to go through to put the staging and all that crap in DC on the mall, because Madison Square, it's all set up for that, right? So, and I was a union guy. I was part of NABIT and IATSE, so I knew all those guys, and they were very, they weren't wearing their union hats. They were, going, yeah, we believe in this, so we're going to help you out. Anyway, but mostly I just kind of was in the back room smoking herb with everybody. And anyway, so Gene's back there, and he's rubbing elbows with the famous folk. And he goes, "Hey, look at that guy over there." And I look at this guy, and it was amazing because everybody was wearing tie dye and 19 alternative. This guy had a suit on, and he was like stamped out of the 1950s. He looked like an advertising executive, and his suit was impeccable. I mean, it was tailored to him, and he looked so good. He looked um, like he was, that suit was part of him. Okay? And he had these two amazing diaphanists. They almost looked like they had wings. Beautiful women on either side of him. And they just kind of float. And people, the rest of everybody stumbling and walking and puffing and eating and drinking. He just was floating around and talking to a few people. And Gene goes, "Look at that guy." And I said, "Wow, who is that guy?" Because he was more than anybody else there. And are there any personal foundational books you recommend amongst the field of study? Well, have you read The Course in Miracles? I think any kind of book that Barnes and Noble used to sell. There's 3 books: the textbook, the workbook, and the teacher's guide. When it first came out, my first copy, I bought it Wiser's, was $100. But Barnes and Noble used to sell that book for $7, the whole set. So as Tesla books. Well, if you want to know about Tesla, go online, and there are a number of there's a publishing company called the Electrical Spacecraft Company. People are calling in Michigan. And I don't like to break the spell of the chat. So it's called the Electric Space or Electric Gravity Newsletter. That's a pretty good one. There's the Tesla Time Anti-Gravity Newsletter. There you can go online and go to the Tesla library in Yugoslavia or wherever it is. And Margaret Cheney has a great book called A Man Out of Time. And she was the first person to really write a book about him, and she published it in the 50s. And basically every book that has been published about Tesla basically is just ripping her off, and nobody gives her any credit. But there's actually other people who have written books called Man Out of Time. It's like they took it straight out of her. What else? Oh, if you go to the National Library and the Patent Library, those are good places. Weiser's used to have a great deal of Tesla books you could get. And there's another publishing. It's called Science something or other publishing. And that is a really good, because they virtually have everything, you want to know about Tesla, you want to know about Moray, you want to know about, any of those greats in physics, you want to know anybody about esoterics, occult, Wilhelm Reich, those guys have everybody, and they send it to you. They print it up, and it's got a paper cover with a spiral binder in it, and and you'll have that book. And the last 10 pages is all the books that you can get you know, and, uh, you know, science something publishing, you know. And so if you Google any of that, you'll probably be able to unearth any of that. So let's see. I'm about done. My voice is about to give out. But I've seen, a lot of things, and I've always been smart enough to poke my nose in, you know? Yes, that's where I'm going with this, you know? So, um, the swirling sands on the beach was in lower Manhattan in front of the World Trade Center because when they built the World Trade Center, they dug all this dirt out. And they also, because they were going to build a marina, they dredged out part of the Hudson. And so they dumped all of the dirt and sand in a landfill that used to be water where they were going to build, the marina. And that was going to be all these condos there. And it's built there now, but they built the landfill. And then after the World Trade Centers were built, we went into the oil embargo and the depression of 72. And so they didn't have the money. They didn't build anything in New York City between 72 and 80. They started in 79, but the big rush was from 80, and the 90s were nuts, So, but that landfill was there for a good 10 years. And that's where Lucy Lepard and I and a bunch of collabers started a thing called Art on the Beach. You go Google that one. Some really wild, crazy stuff. So it's this big beach that we'd have parties and art fairs and all kinds of crazy shit on. And that's where we did the big anti-nuclear rally um, in New York. And so I've been working on anti-nuclear stuff now for almost a year and a half. And the organizational structure was like every other movement was all about the people who were doing it. I mean, look at me, look at me, look at me. People got into it, got passionate, and then got famous, and then they stopped being at service of all our relations, right? And so anyway, I, my last hurrah in that movement, that wasn't my last, but my last hurrah was the Stop Shoreham campaign between 1983 and when we finished shutting it down in 87. But anyway, and why that succeeded is because everybody involved wasn't about themselves. It was about all our relations. It was about the community. It was about, not giving up, not, giving in, and having a good time. We all cared about each other. That was the other thing about that. But anyway, the big landfill anti-nuke rally, when we had 500,000 people show up, I said, okay, so we got some money. We got this movement going. People are sending in money. We had this big show at Madison Square Garden. We made a chunk of change out of that, which was to fund this next thing. And what I did, other than the staging, I had published 50,000 packets. If you took that home, it told you everything you needed to know to do social activism on anything, but we were focused on anti-nuclear stuff. And so, again, I set up, and it was pretty difficult to set a big stage up on sand. And it rained. The day we started moving the scaffolding and the stuff up there, it started raining, and it just kept raining and raining. And for weeks it rained, so it's hard to pour concrete for pads to put a gigantic scaffolding and stage on top of. And we did, and we kept working. We just worked on it, and we moved 500 porta-johns. I mean, it was like a pretty mammoth affair, and I had a pretty good crew of about 20 people who were, not just volunteers, but people who had done this, from the music industry and the guys who did shows all over the country. And and other people who were activists who, they focused on organizing events. They were event people. So I had a really, really good crew. And we had a lot of fun, even though it was, luckily it was in the summertime because we had to do that in the winter and it was snowing. Anyway, so, the time is this Saturday and we're getting closer and closer and closer. It was still raining, raining, raining. Who's going to come to this thing? Raining, raining, raining. And it stopped raining. We had finished like at 10 p.m. before the day this went, and checked everything out, made sure all the sound and the lights and everything worked, and the thing wasn't going to fall down, and all the paths we had straw, and you know, people weren't going to be absorbed in the mud, blah blah blah. We had tents all over the place for all the people, and it stopped raining at 10 p.m. and by 12, it was a clear sky, and you could see the stars because we were kind of out in the Hudson, this landfill. And that's when we were, and we just like, we weren't going to go back to our place and go to sleep. We just stayed there and kind of napped on the sand because we had been camping out there doing this thing. And so the, so we're smoking, we're getting a good buzz on, we're drinking beer, we're celebrating, we accomplished our thing, we got everything set up, it's all ready to go. And about, I don't know, just before the sunrise, the darkest, just before the sun rises, we are sitting on the stage with our langs niggling and just telling jokes and having a good time, passing the joint. And by this time, and we had good herb and we had a lot of it. And that was our motivating thing. Not but, one of our things. We kept us in good state. And we basically, enjoyed what we were doing. And we were very proud of ourselves and the things. And because it's all sand, that water just went right through it. And by the time this time turned around, the sand wasn't muddy or soggy at all. It was just sand. So we're there, we're waiting for, nobody's really going to show up until about 7 p.m., 7 a.m. That's when the crowd, and the show was going to start around 1 or 2. And I mean, the crowd could come in anytime afternoon. And there were no real gates. There was a fence. There was a big opening, 3 big openings. And and off of those 3 openings, we had all these tents and tables and all that kind of stuff. And so we're sitting on the stage, and everything starts vibrating. I mean, like this big waves, but little waves, like making your teeth chatter. And we were going, "Whoa, what's the earthquake? What's going on here? And is everything going to, it's going to fall down? What's it going to be, And about 100 yards in front of us, the sand started to glow, and then and that's where the vibration was. And it didn't even become liquid. What happened, this big metal box, very shiny, aluminum, stainless steel, very shiny and glowing, came up, and the wall that was facing us just didn't open. The door, it just disappeared, and there were 5 to 8 humanish looking folk standing there, and they all had silver suits, like form-fitting, right to look like their skin, but their faces and hands were pinkish kind of, and their heads, they all had hair, but they looked like they wore wigs, and they had the bluest blue eyes, and their facial things looked very attractive, and we were like stoned, and we were like, whoa, what is this? Do you see that? Did I just trip it? What is going on? And they looked at us, we looked at them, and it's not that I heard a voice in my head, but I got this sensation of well-being, appreciation, and grace, and you've done a good job. You are good. You know, most of us were guys. There were three women there who were techie guys like us, and they were, from far away. I'm sure they looked like guys too, but they said you guys did a good job. Good boys. I remember that. You're good boys. We're proud. And then the thing just went back into the sand, and I was like, "Did you see what that?" We got off the stage, went down the steps, went around. Nothing was warm. Nothing was. It looked just like the sand that was. Couldn't even almost tell where it was. I mean, kind of knew that's where it was, 100 yards. Anyway, so that was strange, but at 7, 6, 7. As soon as the sun came up, people who were gonna run the show and run the booze and run everything were starting to stroll in. And the techie guys who are gonna run it, they had been there on and off, and the sound tent had been set up, and everything was set up. The speakers, they didn't have to do anything except turn it on, test it out, which they did. Did sound checks, and the musicians started to show up who were going to play for the talent, and they did their sound check, and then around noon the talent showed up and did their sound check with the musicians, and and my wife showed up, Donna Ann, and she wanted to shoot. I got her an all-in pass so she could go shoot anything, and and I just kind of went back. The green tent, we had air conditioned, and we put carpet in there, right? And we had nice tables and plants and nice comfy chairs, and so we had a table of the crew, and we just sat in there in the air conditioning, and it was right off of where the stage is. So something interesting. You could just kind of stroll out of this thing and go watch the stage. And it was being videotaped, so there's a monitor in there. We were watching on TV, and but that's where all the mucky mucks and the talent and everybody else was, right? And so I'm sitting there, and my wife, she's clicking away, and in there you could do anything you wanted to. We were still smoking in there and eating. The caterers came and they had really good food and wine and beer and whatever else you wanted. So it was all good, and they didn't have any hard anything, just herb. So I'm sitting there, and I look up, and I think Gene again kind of nudged me and said, "Look at that guy." And I kind of look up, and so there's a good 30, 40, 50 people in the VIP tent. It was a pretty big tent. It's like a wedding tent, and it was on the stage. Like I said, it had air conditioning. It was like really nice light fixture. It was very pretty. And there's this guy who had to be somewhere between 10 and 13 feet tall. And, he was wearing, when you were 6 years old and you got a cowboy's outfit and you had the vest and you had the holster with the cap guns, and everything was made out of like pressed cardboard that was supposed to look like leather, and you had chaps and cowboy boots, Anyway, he was wearing an outfit like that, and not real cowboy stuff, but like something you would get at Sears when you were 6. But he had two holsters, and they were cap guns, and they had the like rhinestone-y things, and it was like. And I said, and Gene said, "Let's go talk to that guy. We got to see that guy." So we went up to him, and he looks at us, and he knows our name. Says, "Gene, oh, you've done a great job here. We're very proud of what you're doing. You're doing a great job." Gene and I look at each other, and so I go, "Well, you know our name. What's your name?" And he goes, "My name is Dirk Dorge." said, oh. And he said, he handed us his business card. And it wasn't a card, it was Dirk George, a phone number, and a few other very strange symbols floating in air. Looking at it. And then all of a sudden I hear my wife giggling, right? And I look around where she is, and she is in her head is in the crotch of Dirk George. She hadn't even seen him, but walked into his crotch and like boing, and was right there, and she was laughing. And I look at her, and I look at Dirk, and he goes, "Isn't that cute?" And I said, "So, Dirk, where do you kind of hang out?" He goes, "Oh, where you used to camp out down in the Battery?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Near there." And he says, "I've been watching you for a long time, and you're doing a great job. And every now and then, I might pop in on you. And there's a friend of mine who you will soon see. And what is his name? And this guy, he wrote a book called The Dieter Factor, right? And he looked just like the guy that Gene nudged me and said, look at that guy when we did the show at Madison Square Garden. But instead of wearing an amazing 1950s outfit, he was wearing a 1960s. He would wear, like the Nehru jacket and that kind of stuff. That's the clothes he wore. So this is like the mid 70s, and he's wearing Nehru jackets and things of that nature. I'm sure The Dieter Factor is the name of his book. And that's quite, right. You could look that one up. That's quite a strange book because it's esoterics, theology, philosophy, and really high level physics, and he published that book in the 60s. And he had some pretty amazing women hanging out with him. He always called them princess. They never had a name. They were always princess. So, anyway, again, look at that. 1 hour and 13 minutes and 13 seconds. So I'm going to head out of here. My voice is really killing. I'm getting hungry. I'm going to go get something to eat. Might come back, And, I'm going to see if Polly wants to do one of these chats tonight. She was a little tired last night. Anyway, and I was too. I was a little toxed out from the school. So anyway, I'm getting better and better every day. My teeth are my gums. I have no teeth. Are feeling better, and my lungs are getting better. I'm not coughing as much, and I'm feeling better. I was, when I was taking those antibiotics, man, 3 weeks after, I felt like I had the flu. Everything ached, and I couldn't breathe, and my lungs were like someone had a chainsaw in them. And now I'm 90-something% better than that. So, yeah, a few more weeks of me this, and I'm heading for the deep green. I have one more procedure this week, and then they're going to check me out next week, and then I'm going to hit the road. Sands on the beach, yep. So, okay, gang, I'm going to go get lunch, and I love you guys, so maybe see you tonight or this afternoon. Probably tonight, okay?